Bună seara și bine ați venit la întâlnirea cu binecunoscuta scriitoare Sara Perry. Welcome! O prezint puțin și pe Mihaela, care este o prietenă veche a festivalului. Ea a absolvit Facultatea de Litere din cadrul Universității Babeș-Bolyai Cluj-Napoca și din 2022 este doctor în filologie cu o teză despre scriitorii cu dublă identitate. Este critic literar și de anul acesta am aflat că și o foarte bună autoare de proză. Sara Perry a publicat până acum 4 romane: After Me Comes the Flood, Melmoth, Șarpele din Essex și cel mai recent Enlightenment. Este câștigătoarea a numeroase premii și rezidențe, una din ele chiar în Praga, oraș în care se desfășoară acțiunea romanului Melmoth. A vizitat, cred că prima dată, România în București. Este orașul descris în cea mai recentă carte Enlightenment, deci eu cred că avem șanse în următorul să vedem niște fragmente și despre Cluj. A publicat și o carte de non-ficțiune, Essex Girls. A fost tradusă în 22 de limbi, printre ele și româna. Cărțile le găsiți la standul editurii Nemira. Este vorba de Șarpele din Essex și Melmoth, sperăm că în curând și Enlightenment. Vom urmări în continuare o interesantă dezbatere despre realism și supranatural în literatură.
Hello. Thank you, Luminița, for your kind introduction. Thank you, Gabriel Bota, for making this meeting happening. Yes, and welcome, Sara Perry, and thank you for being here with us tonight. As you already know, we have international bestseller author with us, and you already heard the novels that she has published, but she also has a PhD in creative writing, and her focus was on Gothic genre, a genre very well captured in her novels, especially the Essex Serpent and Melmoth. Perhaps you are already familiar with these 2 novels. If not, you will be. But let me tell you that they are haunting you. She writes haunting stories that remain with you for a long period of time. And as readers, these stories make you question the reality around you. But I would like to dig into this later on. Until then, I would like us to know Sara Perry a bit better, and perhaps she would like to share with us her journey towards becoming a writer. If I'm right, you published your first novel in your 30s. So was this your dream since forever? What kept you faithful to it, let's say?
Thank you very much all for being here on a cold evening. I'm British, so this is perfect weather for me, but I understand for other people it's a bit chilly. I was first published when I was 34, which is relatively late. Not late, but not a baby. And it was an interesting reason. I've only ever wanted to write books. I have never wanted to do anything else. Since the age of 4 or 5, as soon as I had a conception of the passage of time and that I would grow up and I would do something, all I wanted to do was write books. And I think there will probably be people here who understand when I say sometimes you can want something so much you can't do it, because if you try and you fail, you have nothing left. So as long as you always keep it as a possibility in the future, then you have something to dream about. But if you try for your dream and you turn out to be no good, you're lost and there's nothing in its way. But there is another thing that stopped me, which is that I didn't have any money. So I don't know what the publishing culture in Romania is like, but in the UK, if you come from quite a rich family, you can have you can live in your big parents' house, or your grandmother will have a flat in Edinburgh, and you can just work a couple of days a week in a coffee shop and you can work on your novel. But I couldn't do that because I had no money and my parents had no money and I had to earn a living. So I became a civil servant, which is like the most boring job in the world. But I was really unhappy because all I wanted to do was write. And one day someone said to me, I think I was 26, maybe 25, 26, and she said to me, you need to find out if you can write. So you need to enter some competitions. So I entered 2 very, very big writing competitions, and I won one of them, and I was shortlisted
Congrats.
for the second one. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe I can write. So I then did an MA in creative writing and a PhD, and the novel that I wrote as part of my PhD became my debut novel, and then it kind of went from there. So I say this story a lot because in my audience today, I'm sure there will be people who are desperate to be writers, and they say, why aren't I writing? Why haven't I written my book yet? And sometimes it's because you want it too much, and you just have to be patient and wait for the time to come when you're ready to start.
What was the topic of your first novel that you participated with?
So it was After Me Comes the Flood, so my first novel that was published, and the topic really was love. So I was really interested in all of the different kinds of love that there are. So there is the love between friends, the love between a parent and a child, erotic love, faith, which is a form of love. And so I decided to write a book where a man who has never really been in love stumbles across a strange group of people and experiences all of these different types of love. So that was my first book, and that was the one that was published.
And I heard about this book that it was called some kind of psychological gothic. So what attracts you to this genre? Because
I honestly don't know. So I'm often asked why I write in the Gothic, and that's just the way it comes out. Like it wasn't planned. I think there's so many factors to the way that somebody writes, and they are as intrinsic to the writer as the colour of their eyes or the size of their feet. So that is just how I see the world. And I think the Gothic is this extraordinary feeling, this sensation, where the whole world is beautiful and strange and frightening all at the same time. So the Gothic is a feeling where you don't know whether you're going insane, or whether you've seen a ghost, or whether it's a time slip, or whether someone is playing a nasty trick, or whether it's God. But whatever that feeling is full of strangeness and mystery. And I just think that that's genuinely how I see the world. So sometimes people read my books and they say, oh, it's all so strange. And I just think, is it? To me, that's just what the world is like.
it is strange, and it's also part of the human nature, right? Because, so for example, in the Essex Serpent, the novel follows the story of Cora Seaborn, who is a widow, and she rediscovers her passion for natural history based on some rumors about this mystical serpent, right? While in Melmoth, there is this legend about Melmoth, the wanderer, who wanders the earth for more than 2,000 years, and she's a witness to all the wicked events. But the readers never know whether the serpent is real, whether Melmoth is real. So there is this feeling. Even the characters are having this feeling of uncertainty, and we as readers have the same feeling. And I'm wondering do you believe that uncertainty is part of the human nature? Is something that we must live with rather than try to resolve? because sometimes society tries to, have an answer to everything.
I think it's totally intrinsic to human nature in a much more interesting and sophisticated way than people realise. So the idea that there is something beyond our understanding, something more than we can see, tends to be associated with superstition and with faith, right? So there's a certain type of thinking that would say, if you have any doubts about the nature of reality, then you must be a very superstitious person or a very religious person. But this is not true. The idea that there is something beyond our understanding is also the basis of science. We would have no scientific study if we did not believe there was more than what we currently comprehend. And Enlightenment, which is coming out in Romanian with Namira in a couple of months' time, I think, has a lot in it to do with physics and theoretical physics.
Stargazing, right?
Right, and stargazing. And theoretical physics is one of my hobbies because I'm that interesting. And the amazing thing about theoretical physics and quantum theory is that it is every bit as strange and as wonderful and as emotional as superstition, legend, faith. So I think there is something in the human condition that seeks to understand the world, but always wants there to be something beyond our understanding. So we went to visit the Pharmacy Museum in Cluj this afternoon, which is like my ideal place to visit. And it was so interesting seeing the development of science. So you have like mummy powder from like Egyptian mummies, which they believed would help cure various things. And they had various tinctures and various powders. Some of them actually did work, but they didn't know why they worked. And then as the development of science went on, they refined these chemical compounds and realised why, willow bark helps with a fever because it's anti-inflammatory and it becomes the basis of aspirin and so on. So I think we have to go back to first principles and stop seeing the world as being either on this side it's reason and understanding and on this side it's wonder. Actually, it's all the same thing.
Thank you for sharing this perspective. Honestly, I think it's the most harmonious way to see the world. Because you were mentioning about the Pharmacy Museum. I saw this trend of, let's bring the power of herbs back and so on. How do you feel about this, between this clash of, science and maybe spirituality, because there is an entire holistic way when it comes to, using herbs or essential oils or...
I think the really important thing to realise is that magic kind of does exist because of the way our minds work. So if you have a cold, right? A cold is a virus. You can't cure a cold. And if you have a bad cold and you have to go for a long walk in miserable weather with someone that you don't like, you feel worse. It's not made you worse, you just feel worse because you're miserable. If you have the same cold with the same virus and you're sitting by a fire and someone gives you lemon and honey and ginger and strokes your hair and gives you a warm jump, you feel better. They haven't cured your cold. So the power of the mind really affects the systems of your body. And again, I think I'm always trying to break down these boundaries between the two things. Herbal medicine has often some scientific basis. If you take foxglove, what's foxglove in Romanian? Do you know the flower I mean? Thank you. It contains digitalis, right? So foxglove contains digitalis. Oh, okay. So it can stop your heart. So you could say, it's just a herbal remedy. Yeah, it'll kill you though. So, if you look at a foxglove flower, there is loads of myth and legend around foxglove being this like really dangerous herb. Yeah, because the chemical compound can affect your heart. So some herbal medicine is scientifically benevolent and scientifically useful, and some scientific medicine doesn't really do very much, but you feel better because someone gave you a pill. So our brains are these mysterious, wonderful things that can affect everything, that's the Gothic, right?
Yeah. We still have a lot to discover, right? So that's a challenge, even for writers, when trying to find new topics. Yeah. So this brings me to my next question. How do you research? How do you find your subjects and tell yourself, oh, that's what I want to write about? How do you found Melmoth?
I have this... so firstly, I usually have about 3 or 4 books in my head at any given time. So I've just finished writing a memoir, and I'm about to start my next novel, but I also have 2 other novels planned in my head, and I don't write anything down. It's all kind of kept in my mind. So I think that the way I process life and the way I process everything I see and everything I experience forms itself into a story. So it's all material. Everything that I see and everything that I do becomes material for a story, because I don't care about anything else, really. All I care about is writing books. So sometimes people ask me how I get my ideas, and I don't know how to answer, because it's just the entire time like a ball of wool unwinding in my head the entire time. There's stories, and I've never been bored in my life. I don't know what boredom is. I have no idea what that would feel like, because there is always something kind of going round. But when it comes to deciding what would make a good book, I just know. So the idea for the Essex Serpent came to me from something that my husband said in the car. So we were driving around the Essex countryside, and we passed a sign to the village of Henham. And my husband said, "Oh, Henham, that's where the Essex Serpent was." And I said, "The what?" And he said, "You know, the Essex Serpent." And I'd never heard of it. So he told me the legend of the Essex Serpent. And the drive was 45 minutes long. And by the end of the 45-minute drive, I had the entire plot of the novel in my head. And then something very similar happened with Melmoth. So I'd read Melmoth the Wanderer. It's a very old novel by Charles Robert Maturin. And I was in a cab in Berlin, and I was staring out of the window of the cab, and I just thought, what if I wrote a version of Melmoth the Wanderer where Melmoth was a woman and she was a witness? And then again, by the end of the journey, I had like the novel. So I guess it's just like there's like a swarm of flies all the time, and then one fly lands, and I know that's a horrible analogy. Can we say bees? That sounds better than flies.
Still a beautiful picture. And talking about pictures, you have a very interesting and detailed way of describing. They are so intense that honestly the buildings, the spaces, the characters became alive. And I'm wondering if the characters you are developing are hunting you back in a way or another. For example, and I'm coming back to Melmoth because thanks God I finished that book on Daylight. I completely recommend it. It's really intense, but you have the feeling that she is with you at some point. So yeah, how because if I as a reader I feel like that. How do you feel you as the creator of?
Generally speaking, I'm very kind of cerebral and cold about my writing. So I'm always aware that it's not real. So I think of myself as being a craftsman, like making furniture. I know it's not real, and I have to polish it, and I have to move things around, and I have to make it work. But I wrote Melmoth under very particular conditions. I was very ill, and I had a rupture in my spine, and I endured absolutely unbelievable pain. I mean, unbelievable pain. And I had emergency neurosurgery on my spine to release me from pain. And because of I don't know why I'm laughing, because it really wasn't funny, but because of the pain that I was in, I was high for weeks, because I was on opioids, tranquilizers, nerve blockers, gabapentin, amitriptyline, everything, the whole lot. And so I wrote quite a lot of Melmoth in the, like, like Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And so Melmoth is the only character who's ever haunted me. And I think it's partly because I was high while I was writing it. So I can remember after my surgery, I had to learn to walk properly again. And so I would take these very, very slow walks. And I can remember walking on my own in broad daylight down a river path and just going, just looking behind me, because I kind of thought Melmoth was following me, and I thought, shit, you literally invented her. Of course she's not following me. And then there was one night where, so somebody on stage asked me if I had ever believed that any of my characters were real, and I said no, but while I was writing Melmoth, I was dozing, and then I saw a little girl in the corner of my room, and she had a white dress and she had little white ankle socks and white shoes. And I said, why did I see this woman? I've never written. And he said, yes, you did. That's the little girl in Melmoth. And I thought, oh, God, like I wrote that book and I don't even really remember what was in it. So all of my books, my 6th book is just about to come out, have been very rational, but Melmoth is like a nightmare. Which is why everyone finds it so scary. So,
well, I understand why it's so intense now, because it comes from a real experience.
Yeah, it really did. Yeah.
I'm sorry for the health issues that you encountered, but it seems that they resulted.
It made good art.
Yes, coming back to your books. And I remember, because I was talking about this clash between science and spirituality earlier. And for example, in the Essex Serpent, Cora and Will are sometimes arguing, one being on the more rational part of the perspective and the other on the spiritual side. And they tell to each other, you do not understand. So how do we deal, with people in general, because we need to be part of the society, a community, and so on, when the other doesn't understand our perspective? And I'm talking about these two sides, that are sometimes clash.
I think it's a really important question, and I think that ideally one of the functions of literature is to be political. So even though I write books which do not seem to be political, I consider everything that I do to be political, because a conscious and an alive and a compassionate person should be a political person. And what really concerns me about the state of politics at the moment, and we can see it getting, I know that you've had a time of it here with your elections. We've had Brexit and everything that happened after that. Look what's happening in the United States, both with Trump and with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, who I disagreed with everything he said, but he also shouldn't have been murdered, It's okay to think that. What's happening is this. People have come to believe that when someone disagrees with them, that person is bad. And that's the danger. So you need to be able to maintain an intellectual space where you can see that somebody takes a different position, but you are capable of believing that they are arriving at that position in good faith. And that's a really hard intellectual process to go through, but if you don't go through it, we're doomed. So if we allow ourselves to think that we take position A, and we take this position because we're good people, we're good, intelligent people, and that's why we think this, and everybody who thinks position B is stupid and wicked and venal, how can we ever get anywhere? So you have to find a way of accessing the consciousness and the priorities of your opponent, and not assuming that they are bad people. And this is one of the functions of literature. So a good novelist which I try to be, and maybe one day I will be a good novelist. A good
Already
novelist can inhabit different points of view benevolently. So quite often my characters say things that I don't agree with at all, but I create them as being human beings full of grace and life and fear and courage and love, just like the rest of us, but are still capable of saying things that I think are wrong. And I think this is why it's so important that we still maintain this, you know, this is why it's so important that we still do this. Because what you're all doing by being here is accessing my consciousness and the consciousness of my characters and exercising those powers of interrogation and empathy and understanding.
So this way the literature becomes a bridge between the two of them and works as a solution, right? And sometimes, and most of the times when we feel lost in life, literature brings some answers that we wouldn't expect it to. Coming back to your books, and I will switch a little bit of direction. I noticed that the women in your novels dress very nicely, but they also their manner of dressing changes as their inner state changes. So, for example, Cora, when she becomes a widow, she's no longer as feminine as she used to. And even Melmoth changes her appearances based on how seductive or terrifying she's trying to be. And I'm wondering if you're using the fashion as a narrative tool in a conscious way. And
yeah, absolutely. This is a really interesting problem for women writers and intellectuals, is like, how interested are we allowed to be in clothes? Because there's this very patriarchal and misogynistic idea that to be interested in clothes and fabrics is like anti-intellectual, and it's rather shallow and it's rather silly and it's rather vain. But if a man is interested in cars and engineering and watches, then that's fine. And so I draw a lot of comfort and good humour from looking at the great women writers who really loved clothes and were really attentive to clothes. So, for example, there's this amazing letter that George Eliot wrote when she had a ball to go to unexpectedly, and she had like an entire outfit of red wine-coloured silk made the day before a ball, because she was damned if she was going to turn up to a ball in a bad frock, right? And Virginia Woolf, when she got royalty, she used to go and get a new hat, and she used to worry about whether or not her hat fitted her. And I've always really loved clothes because it's a form of storytelling. So I might wear something one day that tells a story about the way I feel, and then the next day wear something completely different that tells a completely different story. When you're a writer, you have to, like, nothing happens by accident. Every word in a book has intention and has meaning. And so I really enjoy playing around with the way my characters look and the way they dress, and particularly with the female characters. So Helen Franklin in Melmoth hates herself. She feels very guilty and very foolish for something that she's done. So she doesn't even allow herself nice clothes. And that's like a really interesting way of conveying to the reader that she doesn't even allow herself to like wear something that feels soft or you know, looks pretty. And Cora Seaborn in The Essex Serpent wearing high choked collars, and then when she goes out to Essex, she kind of like gradually unburdens herself. So it's just fun as a writer to kind of play with all those things.
And I imagine, I guess this is also a hobby of yours. The fashion is a hobby. So I'm glad that we discovered one of your hobbies as the second one, because you said you're also into astrology, right?
Astronomy.
Yeah. Sorry,
so everyone gets the two muddled up.
I wonder what other hobbies do you have besides writing?
I basically I'm interested in absolutely everything, which is really tiring and time-consuming and expensive. And I kind of ricochet around. So I play the piano and the viola and the guitar, and I sing all of this quite badly. I have a printing press. I have a microscope. I'm just always making something. And I think it's very common among novelists to feel the need to create something. So I can remember when I was a child, I would always be sitting in the back garden, picking stems of grass and then weaving them into little baskets. Or sometimes sheep would have left scraps of wool on a barbed wire fence, and I would pick the wool off and spin it into little ropes and then plait the ropes to make little bracelets. So there's something in me that needs to be like constantly making something or learning something or doing a calculation and so my study at home is kind of like a laboratory. Once my husband had like a mark on the inside of his arm, and I pulled it off and it was a tick. I don't know what that would be in Romanian, like a blood-sucking insect.
Yeah, we know it. We're
you know
afraid
what a
of
tick
it.
Is, yeah.
It's so small, but...
And I thought it was a tick, but I'd never seen one before. So I said, oh, don't worry, I'll go and get my microscope, because it's me. So I was able to go into my microscope and get into my study and get a couple of slides and squash the tick between the slides and put it under the microscope and examine it and establish that it was a tick. And
then have Lyme, or you couldn't?
Well, you see, this is a very good question. So then... there is Lyme disease in the UK, so I looked up what to do. This is very coincidental, sorry, but it's just an insight into the mind of a novelist. So it said, you need to be careful to see if you have Lyme disease, so you need to keep the tick. So it said to freeze it, so that if you get sick, they can test the tick and see if the tick has Lyme. So there is still, 2 years later, there is a microscopic slide in my freezer with a tick on it. So he didn't get sick, so it was fine.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And that's a really good story, honestly. Thank you for sharing it with
welcome.
us. If that's okay, I would like to ask the public
Of
if they have any questions for you.
Yes, Bianca.
I wanted to ask you if when you write, you sit down and you start writing, or do you make I don't know, a structure for the novel, sheets for each character with characteristics, how they look, how they think, how they feel?
I usually make no notes. So I have a really odd way of writing, which I do not recommend to anybody, which is that I have an idea for a book and then I don't write for like 3 years while it's all in my head. And it just goes round and round and round my head until I have the first page memorized and I know exactly the voice. So all of my books, I can recite the opening. Like 1 o'clock on a dreary day and the time ball dropped at the Greenwich Observatory. There was ice on the prime meridian and ice on the rigging of the broad beam barges down on the busy Thames. Like I can do all of them. So as soon as I've got that, I can then open a Word document and start typing and then go. And then about 8 months in, I have to start putting things on bits of paper and laying them out on a carpet. But I should do that before I start, and I don't. I start, and then I finish the first draft, and then I start editing. It's really inefficient, and no one should ever do what I do. I like to just give bad advice. There's a lady here.
I wanted to ask you, who are your favorite authors?
My 2 favourite authors very inconsiderately died recently. So Hilary Mantel, who wrote the Wolf Hall trilogy, I worshipped her. So she writes books where darkness and ghosts and devils are very near the surface. But they're also so funny and they're so strange and they're so beautiful. And she was very kind to me and she wrote me letters, a couple of letters that are very precious. And she died very suddenly. And the reason I knew something had happened was that I normally have my phone with me, like all of the time. It's here now. And my husband and I were walking the dog and I left the phone in the car. And when I got back into the car, I had like 20 missed phone calls and emails, and it was because everybody was getting in touch to say that Hilary Mantel had died quite suddenly. And then my other favourite writer died last year, and his name was John Burnside. And you may not know him, but he was a Scottish poet. And I loved him. And he died suddenly, and not that he was 60-something. And he gave me my first ever review. And he gave me this amazing review, and he reviewed my first book, and then his review of my last book was the last review that he wrote before he died. And so it was really sad, because when you're a young writer, your heroes are still alive, and then you get old and they start dying. So those were my two favourites.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, if you would have to choose a favourite book, which one would it be?
I find this really hard because there's so many. I'm just going to say the thing that came to my mind, which is Jane Eyre. And I read Jane Eyre when I was 8. And the reason I read it when I was so young was because I needed something to read, because I'd read everything. And I was going through the bookshelves, and I found this book, and it had illustrations, and it said it was about a little girl. So I was like, oh, that's a children's book then. So I read Jane Eyre. And it did something to my brain, because it was so emotional and frightening and strange and beautiful. I remember being 8 years old and holding this book. I can still picture exactly what this book looked like. In fact, it's just occurred to me I should try and find exactly that edition. I just remember thinking at the age of 8, all I want to do with my life is affect people the way Jane Eyre affected me. But there's like 10 books that I could say were my favourite books. So A Month in the Country, we were talking about earlier, is one of my favourite books. I love George Orwell's books. I change my mind every day, basically.
I was wondering, if you were to rewrite one of your novels, or all of them, I don't know, would you do any other changes, or?
No, I wouldn't. And it's really rare to be asked a question that you've never been asked before. So thank you. That's like, I've been doing this for 11 years, and that was new. I wouldn't. And I have made mistakes in my books, and I would leave the mistakes in, because every book is a record of who you were at that time. So, for example, in Enlightenment, there is, which is not out here yet, there is a phrase about the sun that I really loved, and I thought it was such a beautiful phrase. And the book was kind of dedicated to one of my best friends. And he read the book, and then he was like, oh, you've quoted one of my poems. And this line about the sun, I referred to it as being a near star, was his line, not my line. And I was so angry. And I said, what shall I do? When it goes into reprint and goes into a new edition, I can change the line, or I can credit you. And he said, no, it has to be honest. Like, the book has to be an honest record of who you were at the time. So I look back over 11 years of publishing, and I see every book as a time capsule of who I was then as a writer, the mistakes that I made, the choices that I made, the references that I made, and I would like them to be true and to be honest. So I stand by my mistakes and my theft.
That's beautiful, thank you.
If there are no other questions, I still have a few.
That's good.
So I was wondering, based on Melmoth, which was the hardest thing you had to witness? Because your character is a witness to all the...
Yeah. Melmoth has been a real... it haunts me, because I have to say I find the genocide in Gaza impossible to bear witness to. And so I wrote a novel about bearing witness and about watching. I'm part Jewish, so I have Jewish heritage. I've always felt an affinity with the Jewish tradition. I have family that would have suffered in the Holocaust. And so for me, it feels very intimate and very personal to be able to detach what's happening from the state of Israel from the faith of Judaism. And I have reached the stage where I find what is happening in Gaza so savagely painful that I actually can't watch the news. And I also find the impossible situation that, I mean, I don't know what it's been like here, but in the UK we have Orthodox Jewish communities protesting against the war, and they're finding it desperately painful because Jewish people are constantly associated with the state of Israel, which is an anti-Semitic thing to do. You know, this is two different things. And so Melmoth, the novel, becomes this thing for me that is constantly chastening me and constantly telling me to watch. So I put on the news and, you know, some Palestinian kids have been bombed while they're trying to get food, and I can't watch it. And then I think, but Melmoth is a book about bearing witness and about responsibility. So it's a really interesting situation where I kind of wrote a book saying, bear witness, don't look away. You must bear witness. You have a moral responsibility to see what is going on. Even if you can't change it, you at least watch and you at least see. And I'm failing to do that. So I am haunted by the book in all kinds of ways. Yeah.
That's a really strong message that this book carries honestly. And I think you put it in a very good words that we need to at least acknowledge that this is happening, and not only this, or other atrocities in the world as well. Because I remember my father used to say that there is the end of the world is always happening somewhere. It's not happening where you are, so life is beautiful where you are, but for some other people, the end of the world is happening. And we should be aware of that, and we should be, we should take responsibility as at least as witnesses.
And actually, that one of the, sometimes people ask me why. So I came to Bucharest in 2019 and just fell in love with Romania. This is why I've come back here. And I think sometimes people say to me, why do I feel such an affinity with Eastern Europe? So when I've been to Albania, Poland, Romania, Czech Republic, Russia, I feel an affinity with it. And I think a lot of it is because when I was a child, so I was born in 1979, and I'm from a very Christian family, and we had a very devout faith. And obviously Christians were very seriously oppressed in Romania, less so in Czechia, but still a little bit, but Romania and Albania very seriously. And when I was a child, we knew about the Romanian pastor Richard Wurmbrand, who was very seriously tortured in the prisons under Bucharest. And I knew about in Timișoara, there was a Baptist preacher that was part of those kind of initial protestations in 1989. And so I feel like an enormous kind of tenderness towards the idea of having seen what I've seen. So I've met Albanian pastors who were tortured under communism. I've met Romanian Christians who escaped under communism. I was 10 when the Ceausescus were assassinated, and it was all on the front pages of the newspapers. So I was 10 years old, and the newspapers had the pictures of their bodies on Boxing Day, like the Boxing Day newspapers came round, and the Ceausescu's bodies were on the front page of newspapers. And so I think from a very, very, very early age, I knew that the end of the world was always happening somewhere. So I lived this very quiet life in Essex, and I would think to myself, even at the age of 10, that I'd seen people who had been tortured. And that comes through in Melmoth, I think. And I think, I know that this sounds like a writer being very sanctimonious and being very idealistic, but this matters. It really does. We're not just here because it's a literary festival and we all love books. Thinking, hearing people from other nationalities, hearing other points of view matters politically, and it matters to the state of the world. And it's why, you know, Gabby running this festival, you know, all of you who have this part to play, you must understand it's a political act. To be here tonight is not politically neutral, it's politically radical. And I guess I would say that because I'm a novelist, but I really believe it. And I dread to think what would happen if we didn't have this kind of platform for us to talk.
That's a good place to share information and thoughts and debates. So, and keep being aware of the world around us. And I wanted to ask you also about the importance. I mean, sorry for switching a little bit the subject. But since you are always, you take your inspiration from folklore also. So, and the myths around us, and in the modern world with all this technology, all the wars, and the politics that are happening around us, we often forget about this mystical part that used to be the basis of our existence. And you feel this especially in the villages. So maybe you can share with us your opinion. Do you think that the myths and the folklore is doomed to disappear, and how, what should we keep an eye on it?
It can't disappear. It's too intrinsic to us. And actually, I think social media and AI is facilitating new types of folklore. So, for example, I don't believe in ghosts. I'm just going to make this very, very clear. I do not believe in ghosts, but there is an app you can put on your phone. This is so stupid. Called a Spirit Box app. And what it does is scan the airwaves for radio waves at like tiny intervals. And ghost hunters believe that spirits can like manipulate the airwaves. And as it switches between different channels, occasionally it produces a phrase. So this is like people have been doing it for decades using actual radios, but you can now get an app on your phone. Now, I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe in the magic of our consciousness. And we are programmed to wonder, and we are programmed to find things wonderful and to find things strange, and we're programmed to find pattern recognition. So the reason these spirit box things work is not because there are ghosts, but because our minds are miraculous. And because we are always, always looking for something else, and we're always open to the idea of being surprised or frightened. And I think even AI, what is AI but a form of a ghost, right? It's a synthesis of ideas and language that spooks people. It's just a form of like ghost hunting that's taken a slightly different form. So I feel really optimistic because I think that myth making is intrinsic to the human condition, and it just operates within whatever like technological boundary there is at the time. And I find that really exciting.
Well, thank you for sharing this perspective. The truth is that I saw that AI is creating various, fairies or monsters or whatever, and they seem to be infinite in ideas. And this brings me to my final question, and then we will switch to the autographs. What do you think about the AI writings and their impact in literature?
I feel really untroubled by AI writing because, we are always scared of new technology. So, like, decades and decades ago, not quite 100 years ago, but I think in the 30s, a film was shown for the first time in a cinema in Paris that showed a train crash. And it showed the train racing towards the front of the screen. And people fled the cinema, right? Because they were so unused to film that they kind of hadn't yet quite worked out how to tell what was real and what wasn't, and like maybe it was a stage prop that was falling through the screen. So AI writing is still relatively new, but people are already starting to be able to tell what's AI and what isn't. And so I don't know if I'm too optimistic, but I think that when it comes to art, readers are very alert to the idea of a consciousness behind the art that has like a sense of irony, sarcasm, humor, strangeness, surprise. AI can't do those things. So you can look up like an AI version of a Sarah Perry novel, and it will literally be an Edwardian governess finds a weird bird. Like, because it's not capable of seeing what I actually write about, which is love and faith and reason and science. So I feel kind of okay about it, but I also think that we need a lot of exposure to these different kinds of writing so that people aren't fooled. So I'm not so worried about it in terms of art. I am worried about it in terms of political misinformation and people believing things from like bad actors, you know, that aren't true.
Yeah. Yes, it's really hard to tell the truth these days, to identify the truth. It was harder even before, but now it was hard even before, but now it is harder. But I would like to stay on the optimistic side on the discussion, and thank you once again for being here, and to invite everyone for an autograph session. I don't know if there are any other questions in the meantime, or if there is anything else you would like to add.
No, just thank you for having me. And there is a Romanian character, 2 Romanian characters in Enlightenment, and a recipe for Romanian pastries. So you can email me via my agent if I got the recipe wrong. Actually, don't. I stand by my mistakes, as I said earlier.
Looking forward to read the next book.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for your chairing. I really enjoyed it.